Welcome. I'm Carl Frederick, and I will be interviewing individuals for Kenosha Voices, an oral history project of the Kenosha County Historical Society in conjunction with Kenosha Community Media. I have worked in newspapers for more than 40 years as an editor and a reporter. 38 and a half of those years were at the Kenosha News. I am also a member of the Kenosha County Historical Society Board. We hope you enjoy these programs. I'm speaking with Robert Gentile, author of a book about his family coming to Kenosha around World War I and how they lived and grew in the Kenosha community. He is with his daughter, Lisa. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity of being here. Right, exactly.
Okay. So when did your family first arrive in Kenosha?
It had to be in the 1920s, right.
Or before even.
Even before, right, because when they came from Italy, and as I said before, the two older brothers arrived here first, and they sort of established their way in Kenosha. They came directly to Kenosha, and I have never been able to find out why they came directly to Kenosha, so there must have been some connection here, or somebody from Calabria, Italy, that already was here and told them, to come to Kenosha.
Okay. And when did your father come?
My father came after World War I, okay. So he came here, well, actually he came here in the 20s, and the two other brothers came before that, right? Okay. No, but he actually came here in the 20s, and at that time, he had just served in the Italian army, okay. And then came here and settled. He came with his younger brother and his father.
Okay.
And fortunately, his father came. I understand that he came in on a visitor's visa, because at that time, I think they encouraged young people to come to the United States, but they didn't really encourage older people to come here because they knew they were going to settle here and whatnot. Okay. So anyway, my grandfather was here on a visitor's visa, but he spent, let's see, I can't remember exactly how old he was here. Had to be just, well, I think what happened is that he just came with his sons. He was going to stay for a while and then go back. But while he was here, he passed away just 3 years after I was born, so that was 1934. And he was buried here at St. Cashmere's cemetery. Okay. Anyway, let's get away from that.
When did your mother come here?
I'm sorry?
When did your mother come here?
No, my mother was born here. Her parents came to the United States from Italy, but my mother was born here. She was, in fact, all of her family was born here. Her parents married when they arrived here in America.
Okay, so she was born in
Was about 1912.
1912, okay, and then her parents obviously came much earlier than that.
Correct.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so as the brothers came here, what did they do for a living?
Okay. The first two older brothers came here, and they were in the saloon business, and I understand that they knew someone here that already was in the business, and they just joined him and became saloon operators. And
did that last long?
It lasted quite a while. It lasted until after my father and his brother got here from Italy, the younger brothers. And when they got here, then they had to look for, it was Prohibition. So that's what changed the whole picture.
Okay.
Right, so they had to find something other than saloon business, right. And so then the two stayed in the city home, and the other two moved out to the country, where they built this beautiful two homes that were put together, where the two families lived out there.
And that was a farmhouse?
Farmhouse. That became our getaway. Everyone went to the farm when it was available. During school, of course, we were home and whatnot, and during the winter, it wasn't that easy to get out there. And but otherwise, we were there every Sunday. We were there during the week, and all four families just grew up and lived together.
Okay, so what did they do on the farm? What was the type of farm?
Right, on the farm, they raised produce. They grew produce. They raised animals. They had cows. There were at least over a dozen cows that produced milk, and the Ma's used to make cheese from the milk. They made Romano cheese, and the Romano cheese is put into a reed form, and the water drains from it, it dries out, and then they take that, once it dries out of the form, and put it on, we called it the cheese room. They put it on shelves, and they would let it dry. They would let it cure. And they took every week they would go in with a piece of cloth, oil, and red pepper flakes, and they would they would rub the round of cheese, and when this was good, they would turn it over, and the next week they'd come in and do the same thing. And in the meantime, they also made mozzarella and ricotta. And now we'll get back to what else was on the farm. They had a multitude of chickens, they raised pigs, and then the calves that were there, that were born, then the calves were slaughtered to be sold in the store as veal.
Okay, so two of the brothers worked on the farm,
Right,
and two of the families lived in the city.
in the city.
What did the two families in the city do?
We had the grocery and meat market. Right, so that's what, that's where we sold the produce that was grown on the farm, eggs, chickens. And another interesting thing is, in this area, there seems to have been a lot of tributaries that went into Lake Michigan, and a little creek went across the back of our farm property, and my uncle dug out a hole. He did this with 2 horses and whatever that dragged the dirt out. He made this big hole which created a pond. And in the pond, we had Muscovy ducks. So they even raised ducks, which we used to dress and sell in the store. So there was a lot going on the farm. And then I just looked into it more thoroughly, and I found out that we had 40 acres right in the farm area, our property. And then across the street, we rented 25 more acres where we pastured the cows. And so we would walk the cows from the barn across 52nd Street to this other pasture on the other side of our farmhouse.
Okay, so the farm was on 52nd Street and approximately
47th approximately, yes.
Where
7th Avenue.
Hillside Hardware is now,
Right.
Used to be.
used to be. That's around where
Exactly.
the farm was.
And where was the grocery store?
The grocery store was across the street from the Northwestern Depot, and that was 11th Avenue and 54th Street. But it was right across the street from the depot. And there's a little interesting story that I have in my book where my uncle went and met the former, we had city manager at that time. We didn't have a mayor, and this was Mr. Axtell was bringing in the new city manager. I don't remember the name of the new city manager, but anyway, my uncle in his white apron from the store walked them out of the tunnel from underneath the station there, and a terrific picture which was featured in the Kenosha News at that time.
Okay, all right. And where did you grow up?
In the Columbus Park area. So we were on 1930 55th Street, and Columbus Park was our backyard. And we called it that time our park because we were raised right there. And Columbus Park was from 22nd Avenue to 19th Avenue.
Okay.
So it was a stretch of a number of blocks, so we did not have any streets going across, and our block just ran the whole length of 55th Street.
And what was the neighborhood like at the time?
The neighborhood at that time was mainly Italian, but we also had Polish and German people living in the same area, so it was a mixed area actually, but it was primarily Italian. And the one thing in the summer that what I would say is that everybody had a yard. The backyard backed up into Columbus Park, and their back gate opened right to the park. But they grew everything that they could eat during the summer and also put away for the winter.
So
Right.
all the families that abutted the park, they had gardens along that whole
Yeah,
stretch.
right.
Okay. Which meant you couldn't play in the backyard. You had
Exactly.
to go to the
That's
park.
where use the street and the sidewalk and the park Right. And in the park, which was very wonderful for us, is the fact that they had park attendants who had games going for the kids. They had the baseball for the kids. They had all the supplies that would go along with it. So it was wonderful for us kids. We were exposed to all that, and we didn't have to come from blocks away to come to the park. We were right there all the time.
Okay.
And in the park, it was in two sections. The section right behind our house, there was a slide, there were swings, there were teeter-totters, sandbox, and then there was a building in between that housed all the supplies that the attendants would put out, and then it continued on to another whole section of park, which started with the sandbox, slides, it just repeated everything, and then it had the jungle gym where you could do exercises and stuff on.
And this would have been in the 30s?
This was right, because I was born in 31, so it was the late 30s into early 40, but actually the 30s mostly, because that's when we were young and really
And
played
where
in the
was
park.
the church?
The church was on 22nd Avenue and 55th Street, so it was directly across the street from the park. And there was a sidewalk that went from all the way from 19th to 22nd Avenue. So we could walk right outside of our back gate onto the sidewalk, and we walked to church.
And how long did the church stay there? This was on the west side of 22nd Avenue,
I
correct?
don't remember exactly when Father Tagliavia got permission to use that property at the far end of the 19th Avenue side of the park. And I don't remember the year that was. It had to be.
Well, initially everybody went to Mount Carmel at that church, correct?
Right, until the new church, the Holy Rosary, was built on the west side of the city.
Okay. Well, that was still
on the north
22nd,
side of the
yeah.
city, I'm sorry, on the north side of the city.
And why did you need a new Mount Carmel church?
Right, because at that time there were several churches downtown in that whole area, and St. Anthony's was also on 22nd Avenue. Mount Carmel's and St. Anthony's in downtown. And then there was St. Thomas was on 63rd, I believe, the other side of 22nd Avenue. And then downtown there was St. James, there was St. George, there was St. Peter's. So there were a number of churches. So the bishop wanted a church built on the north side of the city because the city was growing that way.
Okay.
And unfortunately, the people that were at Mount Carmel, they were older in age and whatnot, and they were upset that the church was going to be closed and moved to the north side. Yeah, that's right, the north side. And that's what caused a controversy, and they got with the bishop and they wanted to stay at Mount Carmel, at a Holy Rosary. So the bishop agreed that if they came up with enough money to buy the church, that they could stay there, and then the new church would be built on the north side of the city.
Okay.
And that's,
so why did they want to stay at Mount
at
Carmel?
that time, there were no vehicles. It was that early in time that people didn't have access to vehicles. They walked everywhere. So moving the church that far, they would have to go to another church, but they wanted to stay with their Italian church, so they were upset about that and wanted to stay at Mount Carmel, which was at Holy Rosary, and that's what the bishop said, well, we can't have two Holy Rosaries, so you will have to name your church Mount Carmel. And that's where the name came about.
Okay. So where did you go to school?
I went to Frank's school, and that was on 63rd, I believe, or 65th, on 65th and 19th Avenue, so we didn't have far at all to walk to school.
Was it 65th or 55th?
65th.
65th is a little song.
50.
Wait a minute, 60, just short of 60th Street. Oh, right. 65th, it would be, we were on 55th, so it was 56. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Thank you for correcting
fine.
that. Yeah, it was 56.
What was it like going to school in the 30s at Frank's school?
Well, it was so much different. We walked everywhere. We went to school. We were very close with our buddies, and everybody seemed to walk each other home, walk to school, whatnot. It was a very knit area, and as I said before, it was a lot of nationalities that were involved, and it was wonderful to just be exposed to because we were so close in our area, being brought up Italian and whatnot, and it was very nice to be exposed to the way the other kids were being raised.
And
So
everybody got along, there wasn't
everybody
any-
got along real well. There were no problems or anything like that. It was just wonderful.
Okay, and then you went from Frank's school to junior high and then Kenosha High School after
Right,
that.
see, and that was the thing then. Then we would all split up because they came from different areas, so then certain ones would go to McKinley, certain ones would go to Washington, and the other one I think was Lincoln at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so there were the 3 junior high schools. And
But then everybody came back together in high school because there was only
then there
one.
was the one high school, right, Kenosha High School. But at that time, when I was in my senior year, I moved to Milwaukee and I didn't move to Milwaukee. My family was in Kenosha. I went to school in Milwaukee at St. Francis Minor Seminary.
Okay.
So I started there and graduated in my senior year was 1948, and then spent 6 years there, and then went on to, at that time I left the seminary and I went on, came home, and at that time everybody was going into the service for 2 years. That was a requirement. So I went into the service for 2 years, and I bivouacked down in St. Louis, Missouri, was in Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and from there I was sent to Stuttgart, Germany. It was just wonderful. It was after the war, so there were no problems there. We were able to travel everywhere, and I took advantage of that situation and traveled to Paris, traveled to Milan, traveled to Switzerland, to Austria, and several times to the Munich Hofbräuhaus in Munich. That was a wonderful experience.
And
No,
you
it
came
just-
back then 2 years later, approximately
That would be
1950.
55 or so, right, yeah.
Okay.
Came back to Kenosha and needed to get a job.
And what job was that?
So I went to Chicago and I got a job at Marshall Fields selling ties in the men's store, and put my application into an employment agency and waited to see what was going to happen. And I lived, it was North State Parkway. It was just north of State, it was a continuation of State Street. So I just take the trolley downtown to work. But while I was there, then I got a call from A.O. Smith in Milwaukee, and they had gotten my reference from the employment agency and invited me up there for an interview, which I did, and I was employed by them.
What did you do there? They
I was
They
in
don't
the-
sell ties.
What's
so
that?
They don't sell ties. So what was your
No,
job
right,
at
yes,
A.O. Smith?
exactly. That was an avocation, right. So then I was in credit and collections. So I worked there for 2 or 3 years, I think it was. And I was very fortunate because when I was in the seminary, I had met my friend Charlie McKay, and we got real close together, and then he left also, and he went to Marquette and graduated from there, and there he met Al Miller, who became a great friend of mine, and the three of us became very close. They were both from Milwaukee, so when I moved back to Milwaukee, or moved to Milwaukee, we all got together again. And then we met our spouses, we got married and started our families, and just spent all the time together, and we were lifelong friends. So all the time I was in Milwaukee, I worked at A.O. Smith, and then I can't remember exactly how it happened, but I got a call from America Motors in Kenosha, and I came back to Kenosha and worked in the export department.
And what did that department do?
That department assembled a package of 8 cars. They called it the KD department, of 8 cars, and they were all in big wooden boxes, and there was everything in there to be assembled once the boxes got to their destination. And some of these went to Europe, some went to South America. They went to all different locations, and all the instructions were in there. It was just
Well, that's right. It was a box of parts with instructions on assembly.
right, exactly. It was amazing, but it was very popular. I worked at that for a few years, and then I went into the actual export department from there, as to where we were exporting cars to other destinations. And one of our big things were the military. We shipped cars to servicemen that were overseas. They were able to buy cars from American Motors at a discounted price, and the cars would be shipped to them, and that's how we arranged the shipments.
And how long
So
did
we had to prepare all the paperwork for exporting,
Okay.
which was very interesting.
How long did you work at American Motors?
Oh, American Motors, I forget when I went to,
Or where did you go from American Motors?
went to Outboard-Marine Corporation with Johnson Motors in Waukegan. It had to be in, it
The
was
early
after I was married,
70s.
so it had to be in the, your girls were in school. Right, it had to be in the late 60s, early 70s.
Okay.
And what happened is that they moved our department to Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
So all of us were going to have to relocate to Detroit. So I was looking for something so that I wouldn't have to move to Detroit. At the time, my father-in-law was very ill, and moving 4 daughters that were in grade school would be a big change in their lives. So I just put out, I talked to a friend who related me to someone and asked me to come up to Johnson Motors, and there I had Johnson Outboards, and I had an interview there, and I got a job with their credit and collection department. And I was there until I was 62 years old, and Johnson Outboard Marine Corporation declared bankruptcy. And fortunately, I was 62, so I was able to retire. I got my benefits and everything. And at that time, I came back to, I didn't come back to Kenosha. I was in Kenosha, but again, I was just wondering what I was going to do. And my sister-in-law was a VP at the Guarantee Bank in Milwaukee, and she suggested that I come to Guarantee and just to do something, a part-time job, just work for a few years. So I thought I would do that. And it was so interesting because the manager of the Racine branch wasn't too savvy about having me come in at 62 years old with young people working there. And fortunately, my sister-in-law convinced him to hire me. And it was so wonderful. I worked there for 13 years. I worked with young people. It was just gratifying to be able to do something like that. And I retired from there when I was 75.
Wow.
Right.
When did you get married?
We got married in 1960. And that, 1960.
November 24th.
4th, Thanksgiving Day.
Okay.
That was another thing. My family was in the grocery and meat market business, and weekends were their biggest time of the week, where they really had a lot of customers and whatnot. So my wife and I decided that we would get married on Thanksgiving Day. This way the store wouldn't have to close. So we did that. We invited entire families so that they wouldn't have to break up their family Thanksgiving. And we ended up having a beautiful reception at
The Eagles.
the Eagles downtown in the ballroom. And was just wonderful. They got married at Holy Rosary Church. My wife was a member, her family was a member at Holy Rosary, and we were from Mount Carmel. And then she, of course, then I joined Holy Rosary.
Okay.
And
did she work?
she worked at Johnson Wax in Racine. Now that's another interesting story. She went there right after high school, and it was wonderful. At that time, Johnson Wax was the place to get a job. So she started there. She started in the steno pool, and while she was there, she was able to get promoted to different areas, and then she went to work for the manager of advertising and merchandising, and she just loved that job. She had it for 9 years, and then the policy there was that Johnson Wax did not hire any married women, and they were able to get away with that at that time. Today, that would be unheard of. So then when we got married, her boss, in fact, we went to a party at his home, and he said, "I don't know if I'm happy or sad to meet you," because he knew that Rosalie would have to leave. But it all worked out well. She was home. She became a stay-at-home mother, and for a while, and then the girls all went to school at Holy Rosary, and Sabrina, the youngest, was like 3 at the time, and the principal at Holy Rosary asked Rosalie if she would be willing to come in and work in the office, which she did. So it was just natural for her to start and work in the office because that's what she had done originally. So then the pastor asked her to come over and work in the rectory, which she did. And it was so funny because she started there on a little metal typewriter table with the side that came up to put your papers on, right in the pastor's office. And once, because they weren't set up for a secretary at that time, so it was something very new. So she was there as a secretary, she became involved in everything, and then I became very involved in the church. I became involved in all the festivals, decorating, and Rosalie was there for 37 years as secretary, and that was our life. Our life revolved around the church. We were involved in just about everything.
And the families, the 4 families stayed close all this time through all those years?
Yes, yes.
And when the family would get together, how big? You know, you had 4 families initially.
Okay,
how many?
right, initially, right, we'd go back to the farm. The 4 families used to get together all the time. There's some nice stories concerning that too. We would sit down to our Sunday dinner and we'd be over 25 people. In fact, the Ma's would cook a 10-pound box of pasta. At that time, in the store, pasta came in 10-pound boxes, and you sold it. You weighed out so much on the scale, and you sold it in bulk. Everything was so different at that time. So getting back to the farm, we would have dinner together. The Ma's would prepare sauce, roast, whatever was. That's another thing. When you had your meat market, on the weekends you used up little pieces of meat that were left over, so there you had to use. So they would, I forget what they call that, when you have a mixture of roasts of different meats. I knew the name and it won't come to me right now. But anyway, the smell was unbelievable. The meat roasting, the sauce cooking, and we just had such wonderful dinners. And at that time, another thing, in the store, bananas didn't come like you see them today in the market. They came on a whole stalk, just like they grew. So they would come to the store like that, and my dad would hang them up, and we had a certain knife that you could cut the clumps off. But what was left on the weekend, he would just take the whole stalk and bring it out to the farm and hang it from the tree by the chicken coop, and the kids would just pick bananas off of it and eat bananas. I mean, it was just so natural. It's just a different way of growing up.
And why did you write a book?
That all started when I was about in my middle 80s, 85 or so. One of my cousins said, why don't you write down what you know about the family? I thought, okay, and I thought, a family tree and starting that, blah, blah, blah. And then in the meantime, my wife came down with lung cancer, and we spent a lot of time at the cancer center with her treatments, getting infusions and whatnot, and we did a lot of talking about our memories, about all of our friends, all the things that we did. And I thought, gee, maybe I could start writing some of this stuff down, which I did. And I kept writing. I had notes, and notes. And
what happened to these notes?
That's the whole thing. When I got a little older, I tried to put together something to give to my cousins. And I had my daughter Lisa start transcribing my notes, which my handwriting, unfortunately, is impossible. So it was very difficult. We did get about a page or 2 done, but that was about all.
My dad, really? Why though?
And then I just started accumulating more notes. And then when I was 90,
after Mom passed away.
Yes, after Mom passed away, I was 90, and my daughter suggested that I get a Chromebook. And they told me, talk into it. And I said, oh. And I said, oh my gosh, it's picking up everything I'm saying. This was completely new to me. I didn't even know they existed. And from then on, I started dictating. I would dictate a couple pages and edit it. dictate more, and edit it. And I just went wild. I just kept going. And then what was really wonderful is that if I remembered something and had to go back, I could move that cursor up there and start adding to where I wanted it to be. When you're writing something or typing something, that's a little impossible to do. So it's just wonderful with that Chromebook, and I just kept developing more and more. And I said to my daughter that this is turning into a book.
And who helped you with the information? Were these all your memories, or did others help you remember things?
Okay, it was started with my notes, and then I started talking to my cousins. I had a couple older cousins, and I had one cousin in particular, Palmer Martino, who also had accumulated a lot of notes about the family, and he left all of his notes to me. So I was able to incorporate his notes with mine, and in the meantime, his sister, who is 85 right now,
No,
she
95.
I'm sorry, 95. Yes, she's 95, right? She's 3 years older than me. And I would call her, we would talk, and just memories after memories would come forth. And then I have my cousin Victor, who is 85 now, and I would call him, and he has a memory of everything. So any details that I was looking for, he would come out with them. And so I just kept adding the stories as they came. I kept adding them to this. And then I thought, why don't I talk about food? So I have another whole section that's called Let's Talk Food. And I thought, I'm going to start with Christmas Eve. And I started with Christmas Eve, which were all the Italian delicacies, the scalidi, the tortellini, and all that stuff. And I went through how I remembered my ma's making them, and how now Rosalie and I were making them, and I compared it, and I just kept going on. I went from Christmas to Easter, and then I started writing about food from our childhood, what we were raised on.
What were you raised on?
What's that?
What were you raised on?
What was I raised on? You know, one thing that is very ethnic is called minestra. This is a vegetable stew. So what people did, they grew in their yards, they grew Swiss chard, they grew endive, cabbage, things like that. And also in the summer, which was very prevalent, were dandelions, chicory. And we used they would go out and pick a bushel of dandelion greens, and the mature ones they would use for the minestra, and the fresh, tender ones they would make for salad. We would just have a salad with dandelion greens. So you had all these greens, then you had your tomato sauce that you made, or you made it fresh, so you mix tomato sauce with that, and potatoes. You put potatoes in there, and if you had some meat, you would brown the meat and put that in there. And another thing you added to it were beans. Beans were very prevalent. So there was another protein there that you could use for your meat base and whatnot. So minestra, there are so many different variations and combinations of what you could create. And I outlined all that in my book. I outlined chicken soup was another thing. That was, everybody either grew chickens or they picked up chickens or whatnot. And the one thing is, you used the whole chicken. So the whole chicken went from the head to the feet. Everything went right in the pot, and you made chicken soup. And it just, all stuff like that we lived on, growing up on, that you just don't see today. It's so unfortunate that some children today don't even know where chicken comes from or where eggs come from. They don't know how anything is produced.
Okay, so you spent these years making notes of memories, creating stories, writing them all down, getting this all assembled, and you said, gosh, I'm writing a book. Okay, so you wrote a book about the four families, and it's called?
Lisa, the Ma's and the Pa's. And I want to say that this book isn't only my family. I went on to include so many things about Kenosha, the way, the things that we experienced here in Kenosha and how we grew up. One little part of in here, I made a little story about when we were children. I was maybe 9, 10 years old. We would walk from our house on 55th Street to the farm. Summer days, it was just beautiful. We would walk all the way. So we would start from our back gate that went into Columbus Park. We would walk the sidewalk to 22nd Avenue, which was Mount Carmel Church. And from there, we would proceed, it would be north on 22nd Avenue to 52nd Street. 52nd Street would be the Italian American, would be Bain School. So we would turn there and we would start walking west. But at that time, Bain School was Bain School, now it's Bain Fire Station. And I'd like to add that they used a lot of the artifacts from Bain School, the architect did, incorporated them into Bain Fire Station. And what's really, to me, which is really interesting and I really appreciate it, is the fence that they put around the fire station. It's a double fence, and inside they put all pieces of concrete, bricks, everything that was left, and they filled it up with all these pieces. And I thought, wow, that was ingenious. I was so impressed with that. And now getting back to our walk. So then we went from Bain School, we continued on west, and we came to Nash Park. At that time, Nash had a park there that was a baseball field. They had baseball games at night. They had the lights for the games. They had the bleachers. And all we could see, there was a fence with bushes, and we really couldn't see much inside the park. And I really never went to a game there, but then the thing was demolished before I was older anyway. And then from Nash Park, we would see Bonnie Haim. The big open field right now, but it was Bonnie Haim at the time, and houses were built there, and they weren't really supposed to be permanent either. The houses were built there to house the people that worked at Nash during the World War II. And right on the corner of, it wasn't during our walk, this was afterwards, right on the corner of 30th Avenue and 52nd Street, there was a building erected where they tested the motors during World War II. And this wasn't during our walk, it was when I was older, you could walk by there and you would hear the motors roaring that would be just testing them in there, and then they were shipped out to where they were assembled into airplanes. But getting back to our original walk, so we'd walk past Bonnie Haim, and at that time it was empty before the houses, before World War II, and they used to have circuses there. I can remember seeing the Ferris wheel. Unfortunately, we really never went to the circus, but could see the Ferris wheel and all the stuff at night when we drove by. But during our walk, we continued on, and there was the Fleece Farm, and that would be like 30th, maybe 38th or 39th, 40, right in there. And there was a little bridge there. Water went across 52nd Street. And that's what we get. There were tributaries everywhere. And then we would stop there, and my mother and my aunt, the Ma's, would have prepared a container of Kool-Aid, and we would sit there, we would all have a drink of Kool-Aid, and then we would continue our walk onto the farm. And it was just so, you just see everything around you, and it was just beautiful. And when we got to the farm, then we would just join into whatever had to be done, the planting out in the fields. I remember planting tomato plants up there. They would plant tomato plants, muskmelons, and peppers. And we would take a milk container of water, would take it up there on a wagon, and take a little can and give each plant a taste of water. And how we just grew things, it's just amazing.
And then you saw Kenosha change from what that walk was like. How has Kenosha changed from
just
that
like,
walk?
Right, in my walk there, Kenosha changed in World War II. That was one whole other story where Bonnie Haim came in, and all these people came from all over. advertised everywhere, Minnesota, Michigan, the southern states. A lot of people came up here just to work in the factory. But now, today, it's just the way the lakefront has changed. It's just beautiful. It was all factories at the time. And when I was growing up, everything was a factory. It was Simmons. There was the tannery. I can't remember there were just all kinds of Bain. There was another thing. Bain School, Bain Wagon Works. I incorporated that in my story too. How much he did for the city. But now downtown, since all the factories have left and been taken away, the lakeshore has been developed so beautifully. We can walk the whole lakeshore, and it's just gorgeous. And just the sculpture walk, everything that they've incorporated down there. And we are so fortunate here in Kenosha that we have that available, and then we have so many other parks. We have Petrifying Springs, which I've gone out there oftentimes just to walk. It's beautiful. And then the city itself, and now I see buildings going up, which I think will bring a lot of people to downtown. And they're going to take care of that one open area off of Sheridan Road and 52nd Street. That will be developed into another I think a residential building there too, but there'll be other buildings around there. I think that's what Kenosha has to do, and Kenosha is developing beautifully. And we have to do that to attract more people to the city. We have the Chicago, Milwaukee corridor, I-94, but we got to find a way to get these people to come off of 194 or I-94 and come to the city. And I think some of that is being done. It just is getting much more attractive for people to stop. And our harbor, we have so many Chicago people that keep their boats down there, and they in turn bring a lot of other people or make people aware of Kenosha. So I think that the city is developing beautifully, and I'm just wondering how much more of it I can see develop.
Okay, and the book came out when?
Came out Monday. When was that?
May 8th.
May 8th.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, May 8th.
Available for.
And then we didn't get the link for it until the midweek, right?
Well, we got the link right away, and I just changed. I
had to set it
did
out.
a short link because the
So how
link
do
from-
people access the book?
If they go to, they can start at BookBaby. That's the publisher, bookbaby.com. And then I created a short link. If they go to tinyurl.com/Maz and Paz book, that'll go right to the bookshop on BookBaby where his book is.
Okay.
And it's a print on demand.
Okay.
And that's why it can't be like Amazon where you get your book within a day or two. That's why it takes a little longer to get the book, because it's print on demand.
Okay, and how many books have been delivered to you, shipped, or?
Oh, well, we got 25 copies.
That was the author shipment, so I
Okay.
got 25 copies. But now, as of this morning, 118 books
Yeah.
were shipped out already. Yeah, so
Yes.
people have been calling me now and messaging me that they have received the book.
And what has the response been?
Pretty good, actually. I mean, it came out, it was available May 8th, and this is May 19th, so about 118 books have been shipped out so far. So real good.
Yes, very good. I'm trying to, I can't find Sue Paskowitz on here right now. But anyway, one of my cousins messaged me, and she got her shipment
A day or so ago.
yesterday or the day before. And she was just thrilled. She sent me a message, got my shipment of books. She ordered several for her family. And she says, I am just thrilled. I'm just looking at the pictures right now just to familiarize myself with the book. And so just looking at the pictures, I've learned so much that I didn't know. And she says, I want to thank you for what you've done for writing this and for publishing it. So
Okay.
the response has been terrific.
Wonderful. Now that you've written the book, it's been published, is there something you wish you would have added that you didn't?
There are a few little things that I would have added, yes, because being new at this, you know, you just go on, and then I would right now, I think I would have looked at the pictures a little differently, and but I'm very happy with it. I'm just so pleased with it. When I opened it up and saw all the captions, the way the captions were done, you know, in just announcing each section, it's just beautiful. Another thing I have to say, I mentioned Palmer Martino earlier, who's my cousin, of course, and my daughter Carla in California, when we first started designing a cover, she says, why don't we take Uncle Palmer's font from his
Sign
work and incorporate it into a title for the book, which she did. She cut out letters and pasted them together and made the Mas and the Pas. And then when I had Tony Scarlato, the cover was done locally by Tony Scarlato, who is digital
graphics.
Graphics, yeah.
It's on the inside of the book.
Yeah, he's acknowledged in here. But anyway, Tony did a wonderful job, and my book was We've Come a Long Way, Baby. And he Googled it and got the Italian for We've Come a Long Way, Baby, and that's on the back of the cover. I thought that was so clever of him. And then also we put across the top that this is history, family, heritage, and food. It's printed right at the top. So he said that the title should tell you something about what the book is. Mm-hmm. So then he suggested that when I told him what the book was about. But I was so fortunate to have him do this for me locally. It was just beautiful.
Okay. Well, thank you for talking with me today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us.
And I hope that the link will get out to everybody. We have to get this book ordered. Thank you so much. It was my pleasure being here. I just love talking about our family. I like talking about history. I like talking about Kenosha. I promote Kenosha wherever I go. I mention to people everything that we have available here. And it's just, we're very fortunate. Thank you.